Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Check, check.
Just give me 1 second. Let me turn that other one on. This one's off until somebody walks up.
Okay.
And it's a hot mic, so you don't have to worry about putting it, and you can hold it here.
Okay, great. Okay, well, thanks for coming out tonight. Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Almost ready.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. And thank you for coming for the tour. It was great to have you here and to show you some of what's going on here at Siwanoy. We are a small group tonight, so I'm going to probably be a little bit more informal in presentation, meaning if you have questions along the way, please, raise your hand, stop me. I'd love to address those as we go. I'm probably going to move a little faster, too, being that it's a small group, but also want to make sure that you get the information that you need to fully understand the work that's being considered here throughout the district. Okay, oops, gotta turn this on. There we go. So the Board of Education has been hard at work looking at facilities for the last 2 years, really. Last year, we've got a very young board, so they'd set some goals around finance and facility to take the time to really dig in as a board and understand short and long-term financial goals in situations, as well as get to know the facility needs. As they are the biggest asset in the community, and their fiduciary responsibility is to preserve those facilities. So that really positioned them well to then start us into the next phase of looking deeply at the buildings through different reports. We commissioned at the end of last spring facilities building conditions survey, which is something the districts do every 5 years. The state changed the cycle a few years ago, so it's actually been 9 years since we've done it, but now we're back on that 5-year cycle. So we got a new building conditions report that helps us with the short and long-term planning for facilities maintenance. They also got an updated demographic report, which we've talked about a little bit during the tour, and an updated building room utilization report, which tells you how full your classrooms are and how often they're used, which is really important in understanding the use of the facilities, and understanding how functional your space is. If your rooms are full and they're used every single period of every single day, you're really functioning over capacity. And that was one of the findings of those. All of those reports are available on our bond webpage, so if you want to look at the details, they're there, have at it, enjoy. There's lots of great information. All that work then positioned the board in September to enter into what we call bond feasibility, which is working with a district architect to then take all of what was discovered there, what are all the issues, concerns, short-term and long-term of our facilities, prioritize them, come back to us with a report, and then with some potential solutions. So that's really what kicked off this bond feasibility phase, where they come out with ideas, then we come out like this to the community. It's an iterative process where we come, present some ideas, get feedback, come back with revisions, and go through that process several times to hone in on what we believe is a viable project that would be accepted by the community and then meets the needs. One of the things that's always frustrating about it is we're only allowed to do about 1% to 2% of the design and budgeting at that point in time. So all you're going to see are conceptual designs, not because anyone's holding back on anything. That's all we're allowed to do. Once the voters approve a bond referendum, then we complete the other 98% of the work. So there's a lot of questions and details that we may not have specifically done, but also that means there's a lot of flexibility. What you see tonight is not set in stone as far as design. There's a lot of opportunity for engagement with our teachers, with our parents, with our community to finalize the details of these during the full design process so that we build the best schools and the best facilities that we can for our students. So the building condition survey really confirmed for us that our schools are well maintained, but they're suffering from issues that come from age. The schools that we're talking about tonight are mostly the 400-year-old buildings that just have the same problems that 100-year-old homes have. They need new roofs, they need new infrastructure, new windows, et cetera. So that's what you're going to see as one of the big recurring themes is infrastructure. Also, they were not designed for the modern instructional program. They were designed at a time period where there was basically you just had regular full classrooms. You did not have a lot of small group instruction needs, things like speech, resource room, occupational therapy, physical therapy, those types of small group instruction spaces. Also, we're sitting in the gym because we don't have a cafeteria. They were built at a time where the kids all left and went home for lunch. So they're not designed for the way that we do school these days. So that's one of the areas that surfaced in those analyses as well that we'll talk some more about. And then the other piece that we did, that was September, where we took a deep dive into that. In October, we invited in our financial advisors, capital markets, to talk to us about what is our debt service landscape, what is the debt that we owe on prior capital projects, when does that come to an end, and do we have any opportunities coming up to borrow again in a way that would not add to the tax burden. And from that, they showed us, and we'll mention again later, we do have an opportunity coming up in a couple years where we could borrow about $10 million tax neutral, meaning we would not add to the tax burden, and then a few years after that where we can borrow as much as $55 million in a tax neutral manner. So we have opportunities coming up in the next 5 to 6 years where we can do $65 million worth of work without adding to the tax burden. So all that put together, that's why we're talking about some pretty big projects here. 100-year-old buildings that need a lot of work, but also an opportunity to help mitigate the tax impact on the community. I said some of these. So the main themes, like I said, you're going to hear about our infrastructure. So within infrastructure, we're talking specifically about the heating systems. We currently have steam heating, and those systems are all end of life. So the recommendation is that we upgrade to hot water systems and replace all the pipes, many of which are original to the buildings, so that we've got a fully functioning updated system. That also gives us the opportunity to then consider, can we add air conditioning on top of that? And the hot water systems pair well with air conditioning. If we're able to do that, then also positions us to consider alternate energy sources like shifting to geothermal heating, which you need heat and air conditioning both to consider that type of a system. So that's one part of the conversation. The other infrastructure needs really relate to kind of what we call the building envelope, everything that envelops the building, the roof, the windows, the masonry, any waterproofing. Those are issues that we need to look at the older schools as well. So we had some various areas where that was identified around the district. Siwanoy specifically is, as I said earlier on our tour, the only school that is not ADA compliant from an accessibility perspective. So the board strongly feels the time is right to do that work. And that's everything from accessibility to bathrooms and any other needs throughout the building, so that the building can be accessed, whether it's students, parents, family, staff, community members. We even in recent experience have had folks wanting to come to the building, trying to come to the building, and being in wheelchairs, not being able to access more than certain portions, and coming here but not being able to access bathrooms, things like that, that in 2025 we really want to deal with. As you mentioned, we're not in the cafeteria because one does not exist, so there's a lack of a cafeteria here, which is the case in most of our elementaries. We added a cafeteria at at Hutchinson. Part of the design and recommendation here is to add a cafeteria, and the reason for that is most elementary schools function with at least 2 large spaces, so that you've got large group activity spaces. You can have your gym classes going on, phys ed classes going on throughout the day, and right now our phys ed classes are scheduled in the morning, then they have to stop for lunch. So they break down, set up lunch, serve lunch, clean up, and then go back to phys ed. The entire building schedule runs around that. Lunch is driving everything, and that also then really eliminates 90% of your use of this space for anything like assemblies, concerts, arts and education, enrichment, et cetera. So having 2 large spaces would really enable us to have a much more flexible program and to bring more opportunities for our students and bring our families in more often. At the high school, we're also looking at that because the high school campus, that cafeteria is shared between the middle school and high school. During periods 4, 5, and 6, middle schoolers all eat lunch. There's basically, maybe 50 seats left for high schoolers, which is not sufficient. This year, we actually moved to scheduling our 9th graders to 7th period lunch. Those students are not allowed to leave campus. It's not open campus for 9th graders. So that's helped. The creative scheduling has helped some of that, but we really could use more space for our high school students. Finally, air quality and conditioning should be considered. We've talked a little bit about that. We're looking at opportunities to add air conditioning. The governor passed, there's legislation that's still being finalized, but that, actually, no, I think it is finalized, that students cannot be put into spaces for instruction when the classroom is 88 degrees or more, which obviously makes kind of sense. But again, in 100-year-old buildings without air conditioning, that's not uncommon for our top floors in our schools, given that we haven't had air conditioning. But with the climate getting warmer in the spring, earlier in the spring and later in the fall, it does present challenges from an educational perspective. So that, and then looking at sustainable options. As again, geothermal is one that we've been considering in certain places, depending on what else gets paired with it. So quickly moving on, I've hit some of this already. Specifically, we're looking at upgrading the heating systems in the older buildings, Colonial, Prospect Hill, Siwanoy, and the high school. Current systems were all, the current boilers district-wide were all replaced about 30 years, 25 to 30 years ago, all at the same time, so they're all coming end of life at the same time. We're going to, I think we've got some pictures coming up on this. We're at that point where we're putting a lot of money, time, and energy into maintaining them and repairs. We don't want to see failure in them because obviously you need heating systems. You may remember back in December, the middle school had one of the HVA systems, a fan in it blew out, and we wound up having to close school for the day because of the flooding that resulted. Those units are on the roof. So when the fan broke, it split a coil that water flowed through, and then water flowed through down into the building. In a matter of an hour, we had flooding throughout one wing of the school. So and that's an HVAC system that was already approved to be replaced by the voters 2 years ago, but because of the design and the state education approvals, the slowness of that process, we hadn't been able to replace it. It's scheduled to be replaced this summer. We don't want that happening in the other schools because of the ages of our boilers. So if we want to start now to deal with that so that 2 years from now, we can actually do those replacements and upgrades. And as I said before, the piping to go along with them. Just a couple pictures. On the right is one of the high school boilers that no longer works. It's one of the original ones, so it is one of the worst. But on the left, you can see that's another shot from the high school. Those are working boilers in that configuration in the middle. And what you see is there's a lot of leakage. This is kind of the day-to-day of that. So that's cleaned up on a regular basis, but they're working, they're serviceable, but they're end of life. I believe that's water. I don't know exactly the detail on that, but I think it's coming from, I would think, some of the coolant around it. Another area of infrastructure is masonry work, water intrusion. We have old masonry buildings. They're beautiful, but there's always work that needs to be done. So around the district, we're seeing masonry work that needs to be replaced and some roofing, specifically at Prospect Hill. We were talking earlier. The slate roof is 100 years old, so it is time to replace it. It's starting to experience failure, and we're experiencing leaks around the building related to that. Colonial and the middle school also were identified as needing some roofing work. The main roof at the middle school, I think, is again coming to the end of life. It's original to the building. Colonial had more targeted areas for replacement, but we're definitely roof working there. We need to keep the buildings dry so that we can maintain the quality inside. And then masonry, with that, we've got window repairs around the district, again, at the 4 older schools that should be identified. And some of that is just failure of the seals. Some of that is the mechanisms are failing as well on the sides, foggy windows, losing the energy efficiency of those. You see a little example here. This is from the high school on the left side. Right at the top in the middle, there's a dark section. It's a big crack that's coming down from the roof and down towards the window. What that turns into is on the inside of the building in different places, there's water intrusion, and we get, the plaster, sheetrock, we get water areas that we've got to remove that, replace it, paint it over, but without fixing the exterior problems, all we're doing is kind of dressing it up on the inside, and we keep having those problems recurring. So we've got a lot of wet areas, in particular in the stair towers at the high school. So those are the areas that we're thinking there. Prospect Hill in middle school is where you see the roofing. On the left is Prospect Hill. When we built the new portion, we were careful to match the roofing, so it is nice new slate on that side. The slate you see there on the left is the original, so we're having flaking and areas coming off there. On the right, it's kind of hard to see, but that roof is also end of life, and you can see some sagging of some of the membranes there, and that needs to be replaced. I've talked a little bit about this enrollment and capacity. So that was infrastructure. We're transitioning into enrollment capacity because now we're moving more into the program issues. And they currently, when I came to the district, we were at about 3,000. So when we were doing the 2018 bond, that's what we were talking about was capacity then. We have dropped down now a little bit into closer to 2,800, but the demographic studies show that we're heading back towards 3,000. The elementaries are going to peak sometime in the next couple of years, so it is going to be tight for a few years, which is why when we were doing the walkthrough earlier, I said our goal with this project is more about right sizing, so we've got flexibility from year to year and moving classes out of what are really not optimal classes into more spacious, more updated rooms. And also give us flexibility to keep class sizes smaller and to fluctuate with the different bubbles of groups that move through. I've already said too, most are operating at optimal or above optimal capacity. Many are undersized, as we saw tonight. One of the other areas to highlight too, special education. This is not just us, this is everywhere. Special education continues to grow. So that's students needing specialized instruction and the needs of, in post-pandemic, everyone is seeing this across the board. There's more students that are coming in with special education needs, and the needs are coming at a greater scale, so more disabled students. So right now we have what we call an 812 class here. It's some of our more disabled students in the district, multiply disabled. We've worked for years, and I look to Danton, former school board member, for years. We've always worked to keep as many of our students, educate them here at home in Pelham as possible. So we're really proud of that. We want to continue that. In this building, we already have an 812 program, and that's for the grades 3 through 5 students. Those same students would start their elementary education at Colonial, so they'd do kindergarten through 2nd grade there, then they would transition here for the upper grades. What we would love to do as part of this project is to create a second 812 classroom here, so that instead of those students and families having to transition midway through their elementary experience, they can come and be part of Siwanoy from kindergarten all the way through. We have increasing numbers in that population anyways, so we thought let's be smart and strategic and intentional about creating and designing spaces to welcome them and help them to be part of a school community throughout their elementary experience. Yeah.
But those kids are from, it's not so much to keep them like with their siblings or the parents only have one drop off. They're from all.
Correct, yes. It's a program that services the whole district.
At the Hutch or the Prospect Hill during the extension.
Well, we could put them anywhere we had space. I think the goal that we were thinking of is to try to find a space where we knew that we could provide the classrooms for the students to be throughout their elementary experience, instead of having a class in one building for a few years, class in a different building.
Right, but when you were expanding those spaces.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Okay, ask your question again and I'll reiterate a question.
I'm just saying, you could have considered putting that in one of the other.
Yeah. The question was, could we consider, could we, because.
It's too late now, you already did those projects.
Yes. Could we consider putting the special education programs in any other buildings? Sure. Yes. The answer is yes. With Hutchinson, we did build it bigger with more flexibility, so that actually has absorbed more of our special education programs over the last couple of years. But we, again, for many years have been committed to trying to maintain a footprint of special education programs in all of our schools, believing that inclusion was valuable for all students. So that I think this gives us an opportunity, since we're doing a project, to add to that space in an intentional way. Yeah, it's a good question. Great question. The last piece I'll add in there, we've talked already a lot about small group instruction space, but it's important to note, even though Colonial is the smallest building by gross square foot, Siwanoy has the smallest per pupil instructional space. So instructional space doesn't count the gym and the hallway, but classroom space. Siwanoy, of all the schools, has the smallest in the district per pupil instructional space, and it has the smallest per pupil, we took that slide out, small group instruction space as well. It's actually that calculation is about less than half the size of Colonial's small group instruction space. So again, important metrics to know, just to understand. Just some graphs of what the enrollment trends are looking like. The top one is elementary, and you can see, like I said earlier, it is going to grow and peak and then start to head back a little bit more. We're only allowed to go out 5 years because we can only project on children that are actually alive now. We can't go if they haven't been born yet. We can't really project. But then you see the trends also at the middle school and the high school, or the next 2 lines down. Just for very quickly, in case you're not familiar with capital project planning, this is how the planning generally goes. As I already said, we did a study in the last year, and we got building conditions survey. Additionally, I should mention we did new strategic planning last year, and one of the top priority areas that came up was facilities. So building facilities that would support our instructional goals for students. That'll happen in the spring. We talked about the deep dive that the board took into all these reports in the fall and the start of bond feasibility. And now we're in that middle yellow section, feedback and refinement. So we're going to get to that momentarily. Ideally, in the next couple of weeks, targeting March 12th, the board will hopefully make final decisions about what will be, March 19th. That's why my colleague Alex is here. March 19th, the board is hoping to make final decisions about what would be included in the scope that would then go out to the voters in May. And then if that is a successful vote, we've got to update this last slide. The work begins after that as far as planning and design. The actual work itself is likely not going to begin until summer of 2027. Very small. I'll try to read this out for you. This is the estimated cost for the infrastructure. We have brought on a construction manager to help with cost verification, which is in process now, as well as thinking about logistics and staging of the projects. So we'll see a little more about that in the future. But this budget has been pretty stable all the way through. $54 million, a little over $54 million in infrastructure district-wide. So that's everything I talked about. That's the heating systems, piping replacements, so the HVAC, as well as the roofing, windows, masonry, pretty much across the board at all the schools that need it. Hutchinson is not included here because Hutchinson's a new school, so that's one of the many reasons that we built that school, so we wouldn't need to address anything major for probably 25 to 30 years. So here you can see Colonial, it's slated about a little over $7 million in infrastructure repairs, Siwanoy a little over $8 million, and it's just talking about the building we're in now. Prospect Hill, 11.7 because of the roof. That's part of what, and a lot more masonry work needed there. The middle school is predominantly roofing and a little bit of masonry, and then the high school really is the biggest because it's the biggest footprint. So it's a little $24.5 million in infrastructure repairs. And I will say the heating plant, we've got roofing, windows, masonry are the three first columns. Then you have heating plant replacements. That's if we replaced in kind. It doesn't make sense to replace in kind because steam is not as controllable and it's not as efficient, and it doesn't pair well with other systems. So the next column is additive to upgrade to hydronic heat. So if we do that, that then positions us then to be able to consider air conditioning. And again, as I said earlier, if we can do both of those together, then we can also consider geothermal, but those are all additive. So those are some of the things that the board has been thinking about. Specifically going to Siwanoy. We've got lots of challenges here, as we talked about through our building tour, so I'll go very quickly. It was built in 1910, so not designed for the current approach to instruction. We're right now, as we said, maxed for classrooms, and we don't have flexibility to add or to keep, split sections. We want to keep large sections smaller, and also we want to project a little bit for that future enrollment. We've talked about the lack of small group instruction space. We've seen the kindergarten classes, which are 2/3 the size of current standard. And then we've also talked about the instructional space per student issues. There's the graph I was thinking of earlier. So, the net square foot per student is the tall bar in the lighter blue. The instructional space per student is in the darker blue. And you can see Hutchinson being a new building built to new standard, how that compares to the others. And then you can see Siwanoy on the right, where it's the lowest in the instructional space per student, as well as, again, over less than half of the small group instruction that Colonial is. Accessibility, we've talked about this as well. We want to address this for our students, for our staff, and for members of the public. And because of the 7-level, we've got 28 stairs up to the main entrance, then we've got 7 levels of stairs within the building. So it's really difficult to get to those, and to resolve that issue is going to take 2 elevators, and where they would be installed would then reduce 4 classrooms, which, due to our other enrollment issues, we can't spare those 4 classrooms. So in order to do that, we would need to replace them, which is what is leading us to be proposing an expansion. The board, throughout this process, looked at several options. I think we had A, B, B1, C, C1, and D. In Pelham, we like to have lots of different choices. We pretty immediately ruled out D, which was a brand new school, because that would have been exorbitant. We would have had to relocate all the students to a temporary campus for 2 to 3 years. Could have used Ingalls Field with mobile trailers, a trailer school, and then tear down the building, build a new building. That would have been a proposition of about $90 million, and it just didn't seem viable on any front, but we had to ask the question. Option A was very quickly moved away from as well. That would have put in the elevators and addressed the ADA issues. It would have built an expansion to replace those classrooms, but that would have been the limit of that. And the board didn't feel that if we're going to do that work, you want to be comprehensive and come back once to address the needs of the building as a whole.
Would you, or the state board of ed have laws governing that as soon as your renovations exceed a certain dollar amount?
Yeah, so we would need to get state education approval once the dollars exceed a certain amount. And from what we've been advised, the state education department is generally not going to approve a project that doesn't reconcile our ADA compliance issues. Yeah, which is I think why it's just never been done, and why the needs of the building have been just challenging to deal with for many years. So yeah, no, it's a great question. So all the options that we looked at did address these issues. So after moving off of A and D, we kind of started to hone in on B and different variations of that, and C. So just really quickly, we're not going through all of them, but just to give you a little bit of history to where we were and then get you quickly to where we are. This is just an overview with a colorized version of the existing site. So you can see the current beautiful building that we're sitting in, that yellow batwing style, like that. One of the biggest changes we considered was this option C, which would have taken the wings off of both ends, including this gym where we are, added a large expansion that would come out here in more of an L shape on the property. It would have been a net gain of 4 classrooms. It would have, as I said, replaced both of those. It definitely presented many, many challenges from a logistical perspective of how you would even pull it off with construction. It's a larger footprint, so it took away a lot more outside space, and we've got some metrics later on about that. One gain would be on the left side. You could add more green play space, but this option didn't seem to take on a lot of traction from the community. Our original option B is where we spent a little bit more. We got a lot more positive feedback here. Spent a lot of time listening to the community, revising what that would look like on the exterior, and also we got a chance to meet with staff to talk about what are the needs on the inside, so that we could revise some of that. It would have been a 2-story addition with a cafeteria. So again, same kind of thing. It would have come out this way. On the ground floor would have been a cafeteria on the far side, 3 classrooms on this side, and then 3 classrooms above it. With a total net gain of 2 classrooms. So if you're taking away 4 but adding 6, you get the net gain of 2. So that would have given us the flexibility we were looking for, plus an added cafeteria, but it would have taken away that blue area there is the size of that expansion. So we went through several sessions just like this. We did surveys. We heard a tremendous amount of very helpful feedback from the community, and our architects took notes and really thought about that and came back with some ideas, pushed their thinking on it. But these were really just some of the key pieces, really being understanding how important the historical architecture of this building is to the community in whole, not just in part. Looking at how do we create a more efficient design and smaller footprint, but still achieve what we want with the program, maintain the outdoor space, work with the village on stormwater remediation. So we've actually had we've had an initial meeting about this construction project with the village manager to understand the projects that they have planned, what the flow of water is, share what our projects are, to see how we can work together to do a synthesized, united front project on ways to remediate stormwater issues for this campus and the surrounding neighborhoods. So we're going to continue with those conversations. We had competing ideas about the path through the property. We understood from the community how important that pathway is, so you could walk from Esplanade all the way down to Pelhamdale. Yes?
Does the school district or the town own the country from Esplanade?
I forget exactly what it is. I know we maintain it. I think they own it, we maintain it. It's some kind of, we've got an agreement there. This side we own, the piece from Siwanoy Place across to Pelhamdale. But that pathway was important to the community. From the teachers and staff, and I know Mr. Johnson could speak to this too, often, though, when there's people cutting through the school property during the school day, that presents security and safety issues for students. We don't know who they are. We don't know why they're passing through. Usually things are fine, but you just never know. So we've got to think about a little bit creatively about that. So we've maintained a path through the campus, but we're going to have to look at how do we find that happy medium for the community and the school, both to have both needs met. And then we also heard from the teachers, coat storage closets, really important. I've never been in a school that had them, but I think once you have them, you don't know how to live without them. So that was important information for the architects. And then we heard too from the community, garbage pickup and all that. Just wanted to keep it in the front of the building. Let's be really attentive to what's going on in the back so we can maintain the back for the playground as much as possible. And then we did hear from folks that they needed more information on certain things. So these are some of the things, and you're going to hear most of these covered tonight. So this is our revised option B. It was just shared with the Board of Education last night. So this is fresh, hot off the presses. It is a variation on this. So you see kind of the gray blue is the original building, and now in brown is the expansion. It is a smaller footprint than the prior ones. And if you can see, you probably can see it from there, it's designed to be almost a replica of the middle core of the building. So it's the same height, same roof pitch, same dimensions in general, a little bit smaller, but really worked hard to help make it look like it was a seamless fit with the building and right in same character. If you envision it, it would be something that would actually extend out from, the connection is, believe it or not, this balcony behind us and the kitchen underneath it, that would become a corridor into the new expansion. So it would be almost straight out that way. And it could be pitched in such a way that it would, and those of you who know the property outside, you've got the upper level of the playground where I think the Gaga pit is. And then you got a fence and a drop off where there's a couple trees, and then it's kind of like it's an area that kids run through, but they don't actually use for any activity. That's where it could be angled out. So you'd preserve the whole upper playground with that and give it kind of a smaller footprint and profile than what it had before. Nothing that is on there is set in stone as far as the exterior. These are just ideas. We did hear loud and clear from the community, preserving of the outdoor classroom and the microforest, so those are on there, and there's ways you can be able to work around that. But this was kind of an updated rendering that would address a lot of the concerns that we heard. Also along Manor, up there at the top, there's like those long strips of green. We're working with landscape architects, and that would be areas where we could increase some stormwater drainage retention tanks and add some solutions in there. The current impervious asphalt, we'd be adding areas of pervious asphalt, so we didn't have the water runoff that we have now. We'll have it so that the water can actually go straight into the ground. So several different strategies being used there to help mitigate stormwater. To give you a look quickly inside, it's not the greatest of graphics, but building is the same inside. So the purple is, again, a light touch renovation all throughout. The blue up on the right-hand side is the new version of the expansion. You'll notice there it's very different. The old one had one hallway with 3 classrooms on one side and the cafeteria opposite. This expansion does not have a cafeteria in it, so we'll get to that. But what it proposes is a double-loaded corridor. So a hallway in the middle, classrooms on each side. By doing only 2 classrooms on each side, you now shorten that expansion, and you've got a footprint of 4 classrooms. We've built coat rooms in there, toilet rooms if you want to make them kindergarten rooms. So that would be the expansion at ground level right out here. Everything inside gets renovated.
No main entrance to that?
No main entrance to that expansion, right. We would maintain the normal front entrance of the building as the main entrance. So this would just be an expansion. And the elevators would be kind of in the corners where the wings come off. That's where your elevators would be. So you would come in the regular main entrance, turn to the right, and then go to what is currently the gym, through that new corridor, and out into the building. So it would give you pretty full access. Moving to the second level, really same thing, second floor above it, so 4 more classrooms. So now with this version, it's an expansion with 8 classrooms, which in the expansion is now a net gain of 4, but we've got a -1 coming, and we'll show you why. Going to now the ground level floor. We've got the current building that all remains the same. The gray is the basement. Sorry, I went the wrong way. No, this one. Okay, so in this one, that gray on the right is the gym. No, this one, the gray on the right is, the purple on the right is the gymnasium. This is the floor that we're on right now. This is the above floor. It's just the upper part of the gymnasium, which is why it's grayed out. But now going to the basement level, what this proposes is building a cafeteria below the gym in the same footprint of the gym. So that's the biggest change from the original option B. So that would not take away any more outdoor green space. It would not take away any more square footage from the outdoor area. Those of you who know the building know that there's an art room below this, boiler room, carpenter shop. We saw those on our tour earlier. All of that would be renovated to become now a separate cafeteria for the students, which would really ease up all the facilities issues that we were talking about earlier, create that second space, not take up additional space outside, and then provide, even we talked about not even just a prep kitchen where you roll out the pre-made food, but an actual service kitchen that could be provided in the building. Yeah. So, and then at the ground level, we did a lot of our tour there. Mr. Johnson and the teachers could work and really design now which classrooms go where. You'll build an expansion so you've got some now swing space during construction time to move things out there and really plan where those rooms go. The other thing that, and this is what I'll come back to how many net gain classrooms, in order to do this, we would have to relocate the art room. So that would be moved somewhere. We would build the new expansion. We would move the art room out, potentially there or somewhere else into the building. And then could do the demo work underneath the gymnasium to build the cafeteria. So when we talk about net gain and loss of classrooms, you remember we need to replace 4 classrooms due to the elevator. Now we need to replace the art room. So we've losing 5 rooms. We need to add at least 5 rooms back in, which is why this expansion now, a net gain, it gives us 4 classrooms at each level, a total of 8 classrooms, which is a net gain of 3. We're replacing the 5 that we're losing and adding 3. I know some folks asked about, can we make that smaller? When you think about the fact that we need 5, when you do double loaded expansions, you do pairs of classrooms, 2, 4, 6, 8. If we're doing 4 already on the ground level, it would be kind of silly to only put 2 more and have 6 on the top level and have a partial. When we're doing that much construction, it's not that much more money to add the additional 2 classrooms so that we get that net gain of 3 instead of a net gain of 1. Okay, so just some 3D versions very, very quickly because I know the hour is getting late. This is the current school rendering. Some of this is like Google Earth kind of pictures. So with the new expansion, that would be a rendering of what that might look like. So again, you got the old, and then you add the new, and you can see how it kind of comes out from the gymnasium, would be, again, preserving that upper level playground. And one of the things we heard, too, is the community was not interested in any modernization look. We wanted it to match. The same way that Prospect Hill matched, and you almost don't even realize it's an expansion, that's what was desired here. So again, this is current building, looking from, I think we're back there. The view is coming from back there. And that's what that new expansion might look like, 3D. So you can see, if you see it up close, you can see the window designs are exactly the same. The brick would be worked to match. The pitch of the roof, all that is styled to look the same.
And things like the basketball court, you just do.
Yeah, things like the basketball court.
Middle of the others.
Yeah, so what we would do is we would work with a stakeholder group. We would work with the landscape architects, Mr. Johnson, to really lay out what do we want that outside space to look like? What elements do we want to keep? How do we maybe rearrange things so that we get the most functional space, so it almost feels like we didn't lose anything, we're just kind of shifted things and it's reconfigured. So when you get to cost now, because that's kind of the bottom line. So this revised version, it's actually about, I think it was $1 million less than the original B, somewhere in that neighborhood. So $28 million. It does put more funding into the site improvements and renovations, a little bit less into the addition because the addition's smaller. But that's what was asked for. So $28 million to do all that work, including the light renovations inside and the expansion, and the site improvements outside. Just to give you a little square footage analysis is one of the things that was asked for as well. The current building, you've got a 14,500 foot footprint. The new building would add about 6,000 square feet to that. Obviously, inside would be more than that, but just as far as outdoor loss of space is about 6,000. But then also there's some offsets here because we would be shifting from about 35,000 square feet of impervious to reducing that down to 20. And that's significant efforts to try to help with the storm drainage and to put surfaces down that the water could sink into the ground and not run off into the corner down here, which has become, a swimming pool at times. Permeable clay surface, we would add some there, permeable pavements, so that's kind of where those offsets come in, and then landscape areas, so the hope is that we could do a little bit more landscaping areas. But again, this is flexible, these are not exact, but these are some initial ballparks for folks that were looking for comparisons to current versus future. This was new information last night from the board as well, as far as just some some timelines and things. How would things roll out? What would things look like? This is about pre-construction. So if right now we're in basically preparation for a vote, so that's February to May. If the vote is successful in May, then we'd enter into the next year, would be design and creating construction documents. Being the scope, the size of this bond is pretty big, we would stagger that over time. Then they would be submitted to state education. We would award them to different consultants to help with that design projects. Go to state education department, probably May of 26. And that they've expedited approvals now, thankfully. The middle school took us, I think, like 8 months to get approved for HVAC units, which is part of why we didn't replace them, the main reason we didn't replace them last summer. The current news is that approvals are moving much more quickly at state ed. So potentially we could 3 to 4 months for approval. Then once approved, we do all the documents for bidding out the project, bid awards, and by the time that is all submitted and coordinated and we get ready to stage and begin construction, it's likely that we're looking at June of 2027. So summer of 2027 will likely be the start of construction. There's really 7 different buckets of projects that are being looked at. These are not necessarily in order, but just give you kind of an order of magnitude of what each of the types of projects would be. Infrastructure, generally, those are going to run about 29 months. We might stagger that work across the buildings because we've got 4 buildings with infrastructure projects, but that would last about 29 months. Air conditioning and the building of Siwanoy Option B, that would extend within that kind of 27-month window as well. One of the things that's important to note, new construction that's happening outside of the building can occur during the school year, but any renovations within the building would only happen during the summers, basically, or times when students are not at school, which is part of why it extends the construction. It won't be 27 straight months of construction. It would be summer, break, next summer, et cetera. Then the middle school, high school, which we'll talk about very quickly in a moment, that's more like a 31-month project. It's a larger expansion, as well as the infrastructure work that would need to be done there. District office is a small piece of this. And then if we were to do windows and air conditioning at the high school, we've separated that out, which we'll talk about in a minute too. And geothermal, you see those are more 41-month length projects. One small piece that we thought we'd add, when we do projects here, just to close out the Siwanoy discussion, we will have to cordon off portions of the property for construction staging, materials, and supplies. So that likely is going to be in the area of the expansion as the center of that. We're trying to, we'll need to expand that during periods of construction, hopefully minimize that during the non-construction periods, but there will be areas cordoned off. So there will be loss of playground space during that time. So in order to account for that, one of the ideas we're exploring is the use of what we mentioned earlier, our property right across the street here, across Siwanoy, the path that connects over to Pelhamdale. We could potentially relocate the new playground that's going to be dislocated by this expansion, temporarily put it across the street. I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson, I didn't even get to tell you this. This is like that hot off the presses. I could see his face. He's like, what are you talking about, Dr. Champ? But that was one thought, is we could potentially move it across the street, because that is our property as well. It's beautiful green space. It's shaded. It would be nice and cool during the hot months. It's already fenced on the side with the neighbors. We could bring in some bollards to provide safety on the ends. Just some thoughts. We're looking at what space do we have to be creative about so the kids continue to have that space that they absolutely need throughout construction. So we mentioned this at the board coffee this morning. Some people like that as a permanent location, so you can think about that too, Mr. Johnson. Just some ideas. So, we're going to also talk with the village about what options they have and partnership they may provide as far as areas to stage equipment and supplies off-site if possible. Are there other spaces in the community that we might be able to use for some play space for the kids as well? So very quickly going into the high school, where the challenges we're facing there are very similar. Overutilized spaces in classroom. Classrooms are booked just about every period. There, when you've got teachers moving room to room to room, it takes away from instructional time because they're packing their stuff up, moving to the next room, setting it all down. And even if it's 2-3 minutes every period, every day, that adds up over time to instructional time. Specifically, our science labs at this point are outdated and there's not enough of them. We've invested a lot in STEM education as a district. We're excelling in STEM education as a district. We'd like to provide our students with sufficient and updated labs to support that work. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier, not enough cafeteria space for our high school students. So what we're proposing at the high school is an expansion as well. This would run across what we call the breezeway. So on the right is, the top is the middle school. On the right is what we call the annex that runs along Franklin as the connector between the middle school and the high school. On the left in blue is the expansion that we're proposing. That's the Ingalls Field side of the property to connect the middle school down to the high school. At the ground level, that would be a student center, similar to what you'd think of as like a college student center, where you could have open spaces, a snack bar, collaborative spaces. Teachers could bring classes down for instruction. You could hold events. You could do recitals, things of that nature, something that's designed to be a gathering space for students where they can be focused on peer relationships as well as their academic environment and work in collaboration with teachers. Top right-hand corner, you see a purple rectangle there. That's one thought we're considering. It's currently a technology room with a couple offices in it. The district offices have been moved off-site into rental space for the last several years because of our limitations in needing the space for students. One thought is to renovate that room into some office space to bring a portion of us back on campus. And then we could, because of this expansion, we could then relocate that technology room into part of the new expansion or renovated spaces. So that would be ground floor. The floor above that would have 4 science labs and all the appropriate prep rooms, storage rooms, et cetera. So modern, up-to-date science labs on the left. And then the floor above that would have the same thing. So a net gain of 8 modernized science labs. And then on the right-hand side, we would put a budget in for renovation of existing science labs to bring those up to modern standard as well, and then to relocate that technology lab in there. So this would give us a net gain of, if we relocate the tech room, this would be a net gain of 7 classrooms to the high school. This would predominantly become our high school science wing. We'd get refreshed labs on the other side. And the other thing that would do is there are currently 3 science classes that are taught in the high school in regular classrooms that have been converted into science labs. This would enable us to bring them back with the rest of the department into intentionally designed science classrooms and open those up for regular classroom space. So it's a gain all around, which we need in every department. Estimated cost of this version is just as $38.85 million. We looked at a lot of different versions. We looked at everything from like 6 labs up to 12. So it's kind of the Goldilocks. This one's too small, this one's too big. We're thinking this one maybe is just right. We can't get everybody over there into that wing, but we can get everybody into a new updated space to support the science program. And then if we were to do that district administration renovation into that tech room, that could be as much as $1.2 million in addition. We mentioned earlier, so just touch it quickly, air conditioning around the district for those buildings that don't have it. The governor has passed this new legislation, so we're not supposed to be putting students into instructional space once it hits 88 degrees or higher as of this fall. So because these projects will not be done by this fall, we're currently planning to put window units in the top floors of all the elementaries that don't have air conditioning, as well as the top floor of the high school where they don't already have it. That will actually cover, by that point, most of the high school will be covered in classrooms, believe it or not, because over time there's just been different air conditioning units added throughout the building. We're looking at how do we really do air conditioning right for all the schools to be in compliance and make them more comfortable learning environments. And then, as I said earlier, if we're upgrading to hydronic heat and we're adding air conditioning, engineered air conditioning to a building, that gives us the ability to then think about geothermal heating, ground source heating. And there's 3 buildings that it's viable in: Prospect, Siwanoy, and the high school. Colonial, the property is too small to do it right now for it to be a net gain. If we ever took the house down at 314 Pelhamdale and expanded Colonial, that would be the opportunity to then consider that for Colonial. So if we were to do that, the elementary schools, it's the AC. Yes, the AC specifically at the 3 elementary schools would be $14.4 million. If we did the high school itself, that'd be 15.5 if we took out all those window units and fully air conditioned the building. So that's a discussion point the board is having right now. Is it better to save a little bit and keep the, finish out the approach that we have at the high school, or do we want to look at fully converting? And again, if we were to convert, then we could consider geothermal, which is a higher upfront cost, but there are a lot of tax rebates and different grants from the federal government and predominantly tax rebates at this point in time that could largely offset the cost of that upfront cost. The savings would come down the road from what we've been told as far as energy efficiencies and energy actual utility cost savings in probably the later end of life for those systems.
Will the HVAC work take advantage of the lessons that have been learned from the COVID experience and that the refresh rate of the
Yes.
installation systems and
Absolutely.
filtration?
Yeah. The question was, will the HVAC system work take into account lessons learned from the pandemic and refresh cycles and air quality? Yes. The new Hutchinson building, actually, believe it or not, was built to, I think it was either, I can't remember, and Alex might remember, it was, I want to say, at the time I knew everything needed to be MERV 11 or MERV 13, whatever it was, the air filtration systems. 13 is the number, I think. I can't remember if 13 was the standard or if we were above the standard. But whatever that current standard and recommendation is for filtration, we would absolutely build to that level for anywhere that we were doing the engineered air conditioning.
But the refresh rate has to be high.
Yes. Yep. That would all be part of the system. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a couple borrowing opportunities coming up to help offset the tax burden. Also within these projects, we're going to work with our construction team to maximize the building aid. We get aided, most of our projects are aided somewhere in the neighborhood of about 45, sometimes 50%, depending on the design of the project. So what that is that offsets the local share. So if we're paying over a 15 or a 20-year timeline for the new debt, the following year, we would get a portion of that back from the state towards our payments. So it works a lot like, I compare it to Arts and Ed. We put out the money this year, next year we get almost half that money back to help offset those costs on an ongoing basis. So it becomes one of our recurring revenues until the project is about paid off. And also we're looking at ways, as I said earlier, exploring tax rebates, grants, anything else that can help offset the costs for the taxpayer. So what's next? These are upcoming engagement events. You're at one tonight. So thank you for coming again to that. And we've got a couple more going on. I think a couple big things of note. We're going to do, what is today? We've got a board meeting coming up next Monday where the board is hoping to make an initial scope decision. So kind of initial decisions, nothing's in writing yet, nothing's formal or voted on yet, but kind of an opportunity to say, okay, this is what we think we want to include, and then give us an opportunity to go out and engage with the community more to get some feedback on that. So we'll have a virtual info session on the 5th. On March 11th at the high school, we're going to have a World Cafe event where we're going to get to come and sit and we'll ask some key questions about people's feedback and thoughts on that draft scope to help refine the scope. And then we've got board meeting on March 12th where we'll review all of that feedback and take that into account to give the architects any last direction, and then the hopes of adopting a scope. The board would adopt a scope on the 19th. And we'll say, if there's at any point they decide that they need more information, more time, they also have that flexibility too to change timeline, because it's important that we get all the information needed and the feedback to make sure that we've really covered everything. The one thing we don't have today, but we will have hopefully by Monday, is tax cap impact, which I know is the last big piece. All the other information people need, we've addressed tonight and we addressed last night. I know that tax cap is the next piece, tax impact. So we're hoping to have that for Monday. Now that we're closer to actually having a defined scope, that gives us the ability to then run the numbers with our financial managers and come back to you with that information. So with that, I will pause and take any more questions that come.
Any news on, does anyone have any idea what the proposed or actual in progress elimination of the Department of Education will do to state aid?
We do not yet know that. I know it's still literally we're getting emails and updates on an hourly basis. The thing that I think about as far as funding related to the Department of Education and how that might impact us, we receive about $1 million in federal funding. And some of that's for our cafeteria food service. Some of that is Title I funding for students who need or in academic need. Title II is professional development. Title III is for English language learners. Title IV is another one that's anchored around professional development. Plus, we have 2 other grants that are through the IDEA, so for students, for special education students. So 2 large grants to help support and supplement our special education needs. So if we were to lose that funding for whatever reasons those may be, that we could stand to lose about $1 million in funding. That's the best I know right now, because again, it really is literally, I think we all know that things are changing on a very quick basis. So we always look to our attorneys to help us understand what is this going, where is this going, what does this mean for us. We are fortunate that we live in New York State. I think that is protective in many ways of the things that we believe in and the things that we want to move forward with as a district and as a community. But that's my best answer right now.
The 55 million estimated
Yeah.
for all the renovations, and then 28 million for the Sideway expansion, and then what was it, how many million for the high school expansion?
I think that was, that's what I was going to say, 38 sounds.
38?
Yep.
How did those numbers fit in total? I mean,
Yeah,
additive or-
yeah. So 54 million is infrastructure, and then you got about 11 more million that's tax neutral. So I would say probably about half of Siwanoy. If Siwanoy is 28 minus 11, whatever's left, 17. So up to, yeah, we got 17 million of Siwanoy would be additive, plus air conditioning for a little bit of air conditioning for the core of Siwanoy. That would be additive. I'm trying to think of it. I think, yeah, and I think we had, and we were still double checking numbers. We got numbers late last night. No, not with the air conditioning, with just infrastructure and Siwanoy without the added air conditioning and without geothermal added would probably about a 1 to 1.5% tax increase. But that's, again, you're talking about 54 plus 28 million. About a 1.5% tax increase because of that tax neutral borrowing. Everything else beyond that is going to be additive.
The 38 million for the high school.
38 for the high school will be additive. Yep. Yeah, and this is the challenge. I know you've sat at the board table, you know those challenges. Yeah, and the board recognizes that. We're wanting to make sure that we're talking about needs and not just wish lists here. What's really important for our students, what really needs to get done. Infrastructure, I think, seems like a no-brainer to everyone I've spoken to. But then, it's beyond that is trying to figure out what's the best balance of need for our students, tax burden that the community can bear.
We need a patron.
Yes, patron would be lovely. Kathy, did you have a question? Yeah.
I think the architect is very positive about the chance of grants and sublimation for the geo.
Yes.
But I think that's a little tricky in the current
Yeah.
political climate.
Yeah.
You wouldn't even be bidding for that or whatever, you apply for that till 27.
Yeah. Yeah, so the question there was about
I don't want to get political, but
Yeah,
doesn't
no,
seem
and that's
like
it.
The federal government's really going that direction.
Yeah, so that's one of the challenges too. With the current geothermal, a lot of it is based in federal tax law, federal rebates. They know far more about it than I do. And they're working with districts who are investing in geothermal with planning to go after those tax rebates.
I'm just saying, he seems a little more optimistic than.
Yes. I think the current climate, they can expect it, but with geothermal, we would have to get voter approval for the whole amount. We would have to pay the whole amount up front, and then we would have to pursue the rebates and the tax credits. Right. So it is definitely a little bit of a question mark in the current environment. Yes.
I have some questions regarding the prioritized infrastructure work about heating plants and hydronic heat.
Yeah.
So these are 2 separate things that the board is considering within the prioritized infrastructure work, which would be in every scenario that they would pick.
Yes.
Okay. So the heating plants is essentially replacing the boiler systems.
Right.
And the upgrade to hydronic heat is putting in the piping infrastructure to access those new heating plants.
It's definitely the piping, but I think it's also, it's additive in that it's upgrading the systems from steam. So I think there's the base price of if we just replaced, and then if we upgraded, that's the hydronic additive price. That's,
And that's a dual temp hydronic, right?
I believe, yes.
So it has. the
Getting a little
capability
beyond my
to
technicals.
Heat and cool.
Well, it would pair with the cooling system. So if we went to hydronic, it would not be the cooling piece of it. It would be the heating piece. It would be hydronic. It would be hot water heat, so we could control the system more. It would be more efficient, but it wouldn't give us the cooling. We would have to then add the air conditioning components to the system.
Well, if it's a dual temp hydronic system,
And maybe then maybe it's not a dual temp. So
I thought in one of the previous meetings it had mentioned that it was, maybe I'm wrong.
and without our architect here tonight, I don't want to misspeak. So I can get that information.
I just want to understand
Yep.
because I just want to understand the scope of, and I want a climate-controlled environment for our
Yeah.
kids, just to be perfectly clear.
Understood.
But, when we talk about the kind of money that we are proposing spending within all of the bond work, of $160 million, if all of the scenarios go through, we're talking about the potential spending 45% of that on heating and cooling
Yeah.
buildings, which is a lot of money.
Yep.
So it's just, I want to make sure that we're considering, the capabilities of each system we are putting in,
Yeah.
which is 3.
Yeah.
We're putting in a hydronic system, which if it's dual temp and could be, run in reverse, which these residential ones are, I don't know enough about commercial buildings, has the capability to cool because you would pump in cold water instead of hot water, absorbing a portion of the heat. Coupled with all of the elementaries have been, they've had their electrical systems updated to be able to fit in these new window units that the
Right.
governor has mentioned in the new law, right?
Right.
So we have the ability to put in these window units that we don't currently have to comply with the new law. And our electric system for the elementaries has already been upgraded prior to any of this bond work
Right.
to be able to cool the 3rd floor. And then putting in this new hydronic heat plant and hydronic system that has potentially, to be verified, a cooling, functionality to it, independent of the heating and the HVAC, like ducts system going in, which the geothermal requires that kind of ductwork to be. Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I'm so
I was
sorry.
going to try to repeat, but yeah.
I don't know what to say into the mic that I said already, but
Yeah.
just as like and you said the architects aren't here tonight, and I know there was an update yesterday, and
Yeah.
pardon me, I didn't
understood.
end up viewing the meeting last night. I don't know if it was spoken about last night. But we're talking about these systems as if they're layered, as if they rely on each other, and some do and some don't. And when you're talking about, if we do all 3, we're talking about 45%, more than the price of the Simonoy work,
Right.
Almost equal to the price of the Simonoy and the school work
Right.
for just conditioning, not to mention, I know there's been a lot of talk about shifting the calendar and what's possible to be able to release schools earlier than we currently do. So just putting all of these pieces together, I feel that we have potentially more choices than just, having to do one, to have to do the second, to have to do the third without any kind of calendar mitigation as well. I know it's been considered to move it to let the kids out earlier. The high school kids already get out largely before the elementary school kids, and we have the ability to make those kinds of shifts, and that's in flux.
To a degree.
Yeah, to a degree.
I don't want to get off in the calendar rabbit hole tonight, but yes.
100%. But it is
Yeah.
on the table, and we are talking about those real big days, those heat days, the calendar coupled with the new electrical work in the elementary schools that can house the new ACs that are hopefully maybe going in right this June. We're
Hopefully
keeping our
this
fingers
spring.
crossed? Okay. So already we're doing more. We have already done more work than we have in the previous years. And these end-of-life steams, like, gotta go, the picture, like, for sure. And there's the possibility of upgrading this to hydronic heat. I think it's worth clarifying, is this a dual temp system?
Yeah.
Can you run this, like a residential dual temp hydronic system, can you run the cold water through this that will absorb, water absorbs maybe 3,000 more times a volume of water will absorb 3 times, I think like maybe 3,000 times, something ridiculous, like the amount of heat that air can. And so we don't even know how that works yet. We haven't even given it a test run to if that functionality is in fact part of this hydronic heat system.
Yeah,
So it feel like to opt into all of this other stuff without just seeing like, what is the climate like with this?
So I think all fair points. I think definitely from a technical perspective, there's a lot there that I'm not able to answer, but I would happily forward that whole kind of concept to the architect to try to get some more information there. One thing I would say about this whole process is we are still conceptual, and part of the refinement that comes with that afterwards is drilling down in exactly that, really getting into the specs of what exact kind of systems are we going to be using? Is it going to be, dual hydronic? All the different things. What's the best? One of the things we're in the process of doing now too is expanding our facilities committee into what we're calling a bond steering committee. We had one of those last time around. So we may have seen we did a survey recently soliciting for residents that have got professional experience.
I don't have a professional background in it.
Okay, you sounded like you did.
But thank you.
But what we're doing, and I say that because we're expanding to bring in some more community residents who have a vested interest in the community and a professional expertise to help us think of and grapple with those exact kind of questions. Kick the tires, push the architects, push the construction managers to really be thoughtful about all those things, because this is a huge ask and a huge investment. So all excellent points.
And we're still in the phase where this is all happening
Yeah, we're on the front end of all this.
Okay.
We're very conceptual now. As we continue towards design, we're definitely going to get more, all those specific questions and specifications are going to start to be worked out.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, I thought there was a couple other hands before. I know we're getting close to, we'll get a little bit more time. Okay. See, after your question, everybody's, they're intimidated now. No, thank you. This is the value of doing this, is to think about all of those things and to hear from one another what's important. So we really appreciate you coming out tonight. Don't want to keep you any longer than need be, but really would love to continue the engagement. Please, if you haven't signed up for our email group, please take one of those cards in the back and do that. If you don't have children in the schools, we want to make sure that we stay connected and keep you up to date on things. And with that, I'd say thank you very much. We'll stick around for a couple minutes if you have any more questions, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.